What is up, disc golfers? Today on Iceberg TV, we are going to be having a quick look at the MVP Reactor in the glow plastic. Our friends over at Aha Shack Disc Golf Goods in Charlotte, North Carolina have hooked us up with a really sweet glow reactor to use for the video today. We're going to be comparing this mid-range directly to the brand new Simon Lizotte Hex. Now, I know I did a full review of the Hex, but if you're unable to get your hands on the Hex, or you just don't want to use the Hex because you're not a fan of Simon, I wanted to see how similar the Reactor was to the Hex. So the purpose of today's video will be comparing the Reactor to the Hex. So the first half of the video will be all of the Reactor throws, and the second half of the video will be all of the Hex throws. Please like the video, please leave a comment below. You're watching Iceberg TV, and enjoy the video. So MVP glow discs have a history of being a little more overstable than the normal runs, and I found this to be true with my original review video of the Hex. Now I'm curious to see how the Reactor stands up to it. I know Simon, before he had the Hex, he was really enjoying the Reactor as his go-to mid-range. Both discs carrying a very comfortable 5-speed profile, which is not very wide, so it feels comfortable in most hands with both discs. What I really want to see in this video, because the discs are so similar, is the Reactor that much more overstable than the Hex, or do they fly mostly the same, and is this a good Hex alternative for you for someone who doesn't own the Hex, or someone who's on the fence with what they would like to purchase for themselves? So when I first started testing out the disc, I was throwing it on mostly a hyzer angle, and when thrown on a hyzer, the Reactor was getting a massive fade. And on the third or fourth hole of our round today, we actually ran into this really cool rat snake. It's getting warmer outside and the snakes are finally coming out, so definitely be careful out there. And then when we got back to throwing, I was still trusting it on either hyzer or flat releases just to see how it would fly. And I found the more flat I threw it and the more nose down I threw it, I was starting to actually get a little bit of that turn, but I was finding myself having to throw it pretty hard to get it to turn. We threw it down this big downhill shot here and we got this massive fade over to the left. It definitely has a good reliable fade, the Reactor. And most mid-ranges can't handle the off-axis torque of the forehand throw, but the Reactor holds up quite nicely to the forehand. I threw some really awesome flex shots and fairly straight forehand shots, but as expected, that massive fade kicks in, not only with the backhand, but also with the forehand. For me, this disc really shined on these forehand lines. I had a really fun time just putting a lot of power into it, nice and hard and flat, and letting the disc get that little bit of mid-flight turn. And on the backhand shots, just really enjoying that stability, releasing it nice and flat and letting it fade. We'll finish up with a few more throws here, and then we'll do the quick breakdown of the Hex as well in very similar fashion. Now, when it came to the Lizotte Hex, I found that it was a little bit easier for it to get that flip up, but it still has that same extremely reliable fade. Unless you really rip on it like I do here, it's not really going to carry super straight. It'll carry straight for a while, but then it will still have that reliable fade. This run of the Hex is certainly more overstable than runs from the past. And I find that when you do get it to turn, either you throw it very hard flat or throw it on a slight ante. If you can get it to turn, it will hold the turn slightly longer than the Reactor. And when you put it on hyzer, it'll want to pop up a little bit more. And I've never been a huge believer in flight numbers, but when it comes to MVP, I think they absolutely nailed the flight numbers between these two discs. Although they're extremely similar, they were obviously very meticulous about the way they advertised the flight numbers. When it came to the forehand throw, same kind of deal. I was able to just throw it on a slight hyzer, but with quite a bit of power. And I was pleasantly surprised with the amount of torque that the Lizotte Hex was able to handle, not only on backhand, but also with the forehand throws. Alright everybody, so my final thoughts, Lizotte Hex versus Reactor. I think the Reactor is a very great complementary mid-range to Lizotte Hex. If you want a mid-range that you know will handle a little bit more torque, especially with the forehand, or you're a power thrower, you definitely will enjoy the Reactor right alongside it. But if you're unable to get much turn out of your Hex, then you probably don't need the Reactor because you're going to just have overlap. But if you are getting shot shaping out of your Hex, then I would highly recommend getting a Reactor to go alongside it. Massive shout out to Aha Shack Disc Golf Goods up here in North Carolina for providing me with the Reactor for today's video, and Down for Disc Golf actually providing me with the Lizotte Hex for the previous Lizotte review. But I hope this video helps you guys make an informed decision. You're watching Iceberg TV. Please comment down below, and take care.